need to introduce myself. My name is Martin PALOUŠ. I'm a board member of Václav Havel Library in Prague, but also president of Václav Havel Library Foundation in New York. It's my privilege and honor to moderate the second panel, which basically will be following up the first one. So I would like to invite to the podium the panelists. I will introduce them in a moment, but the panelists are SHIN DONG-HYUK from North Korea. Please, can you come here? And again, I would like to ask Katrine Camilleri to come here again. And in general, my strategy now is to have more conversation than lectures, because when I read the title of our second panel, I said to myself, gosh, it's an invitation to a kind of seminar in international human rights law. And I don't think that it is an appropriate time for such exercises here. I would like to start pointing to a known contrast. And because I'm myself notoriously known to quote from Hannah Arendt all the time, I'm not going to be quoting from her, but I remember in her book on totalitarianism, there is a very strong chapter in which she points to a contrast between rights of man or human rights, you can take it both ways, as a declared principle, as something we as mankind like to believe in, and then shortage of these rights in a moment when some concrete people somewhere are in need of having these rights and are maybe in a desperate situation, not living with, I would say, the basic right of all rights to be recognized as a dignified human being. So what I'm aiming at is that we have here, I think, an extremely interesting opportunity to listen from people who, through their life experience, can tell us something and to shed some light on all these international mechanisms in the area of human rights that are supposed to protect them, and they are not protecting them often sufficiently. Obviously, this is also translated into another smaller problem, and the problem that actually has been already mentioned here by František Janouch when he pointed to a very important fact, that this project is an amalgamation of activities of NGOs or non-governmental organizations and interstate institutions. I used to work as a diplomat and also as a human rights defender, if you want to say. So we all know something about this interface between the worlds of individual human beings and worlds of those who are in charge of interstate mechanisms. So this would be my question here also to our distinguished panelists, first to give us their story, and then how they feel, how they encounter, how they meet, and do they find efficient in their own situation legal instruments, international mechanisms, what they can use for their own support. Because this is one of the questions which is, in my view, extremely important, topical and actual. The question is, can we help somehow to make the communication between interstate mechanisms and the world of dissidents, individuals, human rights organizations, can we make this communication a little bit more efficient? So, these are my questions. My strategy is now I will introduce the panelists first, then I will give them floor for their statements. Then I may have some questions to them, and then I would like to open it up to you, so that we can eventually have a conversation. Let me to start with our participant from North Korea. I think this is a very unique opportunity. Shin DONG-HYUK, born 19 November 1982 in Shin in Gwen, is a North Korean defector living in South Korea. He is currently the only known prisoner to have successfully escaped alive from a total control zone, great internment camp in North Korea. And Mr. Shin is the subject of a biography, Escape from Camp 14. So this is, I think, something what we really have a chance now to use to ask gentleman about his life experience, life story, and how he encounters, how does he see the world from the perspective of international mechanisms of human rights. Then, already partly introduced herself, but Katrine Camilleri is assistant director of this beautiful Jesuit refugee service, Malta. And I think that it's in nature of her job that on the one hand, she is a lawyer, so she certainly understands this perspective, this point of view, but then need to share her legal expertise with concrete people in concrete situations, people who are very often unwanted. Maybe some organizations are ready to help them, but to resolve their legal status might be extremely difficult problem, especially if they are in detention, if they are entering this beautiful European Union, Schengen space or zone or whatever it is, and so on and so forth. Hannah Arendt said that the 20th century, in a way, is a century of homeless and refugees, stateless homeless people. So this would be my question to you, Madam, and give us some enlightenment in this respect. But first, I would like to give the floor to our Korean visitor. Sir, you have the floor.
하벨 대사관에서 주최하는 용기반 행사에 초청해 주셔서 대단히 고맙습니다.
I'm very honored to hear today in this great meaningful event.
사실 우리 북한의 인권 문제는 이미 전에 벌써 20년 전에 이제 국제사회에 알려지기 시작해가지고 지금까지 많은 유엔에서 또 국제사회에서 많은 논의들이 이루어지고 있습니다.
The human rights situation in North Korea has been known to the world since 20 years ago, and the United Nations and many international communities are discussing about the human rights situation in North Korea.
그런데 이제 북한의 독재는 거의 지금 70년 가까이 되고 있다는 거죠.
But the fact is that the dictatorship has been leading the North Korea society for more than almost 70 years.
그리고 북한의 정치범시형사는 50년이 넘었습니다.
And also it's been almost 50 years which the political prison camp has been established in North Korea.
그리고 정말로 그 북한의 정치범시형소에 진짜로 정치범 죄수들이 살고 있느냐 했을 때에 저의 대답은 지금 현재 북한의 정치범시형소에 정치범 죄수들은 단 한 명도 사실 없다는 거죠.
However, the prisoners who are imprisoned in the political prison camps in North Korea is not actually the political prisoners.
우리가 다 벗었던 것처럼 김정은이는 자기의 검어부를 자기랑 생각이 틀리다고 해서 공개적으로 검기총해서 죽였거든요.
As you know, Kim Jong-un, the current leader of North Korea, actually executed his uncle because of his uncle's different idea from him.
꼭 그게 김정은 검부한테만 그런 일이 있었는 것은 아니고 북한의 모든 사람들한테 똑같이 그렇게 한 겁니다.
It is not only his uncle, but almost many North Korean people are executed by the regime.
정말 자기가 생각하는 북한 독재자가 생각하는 정치범 죄수들은 다 죽였죠.
The dictator in North Korea killed many people whom he think whom you think they are political prisoners.
그리고 그 정치범 죄수들과 아무 상관이 없는 자기 가족들, 자기 친척들, 그리고 전혀 알지도 못하는 친구들, 그 사람들을 다 잡아서 정치범 수용소에다 잡아놓은 겁니다.
The dictator of North Korea even imprisoned the political prisoners' family, relatives, and even their friends.
사실 지금 현재 북한 정치범 수용소에 살고 있는 많은 정치범 죄수들은 자기가 무슨 죄를 짓고 그 안에 살고 있는지 전혀 알지도 못하고 살고 있는 거죠.
However, many political prisoners in North Korea, they don't really know their crime.
제 아버지 엄마도 10대 나이에 정치범 수용소에 잡혀 들어가고 또 잡혀 들어갈 때 무슨 죄가 있는지 알지도 못한 상태에서 잡혀 들어간 겁니다.
My parents were sent to political prison camp in their teenager age, but they didn't really know what's wrong with them, or they didn't really know their crime.
그 안에서 이제 애가 태어나면 그 애도 자연스럽게 누가 특별하게 가르쳐주지 않아도 자기 스스로가 정치범 죄수라는 것을 이렇게 느끼게 되고 살아간다는 거죠.
If a baby is born in political prison camp from the political prisoners, the baby doesn't. No one teaches the baby if he or she is a political prisoner, but the baby naturally knows that I'm the political prisoner.
그런데 정말 이 정치범 죄수한테 제일 무서운 거는 여러분들도 다 알고 있는 김일성, 김정일 또 평양에 어디 가나 다 있는 김일성, 김정일을 독재자를 찬양하는 사인은 이 정치범 수용소에 단 한 개도 없다는 겁니다.
But the most scared thing for political prisoner is the dictator of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un. But there is no sign or pictures of these dictators in political prison camp.
이 정치범 수용소 안에는 TV도 없고 라디오도 없고 신문도 존재하지도 않고 심지어 북한 사람 그 누구나 다 공부하고 이제 그렇게 배우는 김일성 독재자에 대해서 정치범 수용소에서는 단 하나도 가르쳐주지 않는다는 거죠.
In political prison camp in North Korea, there is no television, radio, or newspaper. Even the prisoners are not allowed to learn about the dictator in North Korea.
그들한테 이런 거 자체를 가르쳐주지 않는 이유는 그들은 오늘 죽어도 되고 내일 죽어도 되고 아니면 한 달 후에 죽어도 되고 언제 죽어도 상관없기 때문에 그냥 일만 하다가 죽을 사람들이기 때문에 전혀 이런 거 자체를 가르쳐줄 필요를 느끼지 못하고 있는 거죠.
The reason why the political prisoner in North Korea cannot learn about the history of Kim Il-sung or the dictator is that the camp guards think that the political prisoner can be killed anytime.
그리고 정치범 수용소에서 뭐 많은 수는 아니지만은 이제 그 수용소에서 이제 아이들이 태어나고 있는데 그 아이들을 가르쳐주는 선생님도 바로 총을 차고 다니는 간수가 그 아이들을 가르쳐주고 있는 거예요.
Also, there are some children in political prison camp, and the teacher of these children in camp is actually the camp guard.
근데 그 간수들이 어린 아이들한테 어린 죄수들한테 가르쳐 주는 게 굉장히 충격적입니다.
What the camp guard teaches these children in political prison camp is very shocking.
우리 법은 너희 부모나 너희 아버지나 너희 엄마를 죽였어야 했었지만 살려줬기 때문에 그 살려준 보답을 하기 위해서는 너희들이 일을 열심히 해야 된다. 그렇게 어린 아이들한테 가르쳐 주고 있거든요.
The camp guard teaches these children in political prison camps that your parents has to be killed by the regime, but we let them survive, so you guys have to obey our rules.
이 간수들한테는 뭐 어린 아이 죄수든 뭐 나이 많은 죄수든 여자 죄수든 전혀 그거를 상관하지 않습니다. 그냥 똑같은 정치범 죄수로서 애들한테도 똑같이 폭력을 가하고 나이 많은 어른들한테 똑같이 폭력을 가하고 전혀 그거를 죄수로서 무슨 어떠한 조건을 따지지 않거든요.
The camp guards treat women, children, or even elderly people same as other political prisoners.
일하다가 사고로 죽거나 아니면 뭐 공개총으로 죽거나 아니면 뭐 매맞아 죽거나 해도 그 누가 책임지는 사람은 정치범 수용소에 단 한 명도 없다는 거죠.
There is no one who is responsible for political prisoners who died from accident or public execution or even beating.
제가 7살 때 그 학교에서 일주일에 한 2번씩 정치범, 그러니까 죄수들이기 때문에 어린아이들이기 때문에 무슨 어떤 이상한 물건을 주머니에다 놓고 다니는지 이제 검사하는 게 있습니다.
When I was 7 years old, there was an inspection in my school, like twice a week.
근데 이제 그 7살짜리 여자의 이 주머니에서 학교로 오다가 길바닥에서 주워 갖고 온 이제 음식이 있었었죠.
One day, one of my fellow friends, a 7 years old girl, in her pockets there was a food that was found by the camp guard.
근데 그거는 음식이 아니라 우리가 그냥 생거로 먹을 수 없는 정말 우리 여기 앉아 있는 우리들은 생거로 먹을 수 없는 그런 것을 이제 그런 곡식을 이제 주워 갖고 왔던 겁니다.
It was actually not really a food that we can actually eat. It was just a small portion of grain.
근데 이제 그 수용소에서 만든 법에 우리 죄수들이 먹을 수 있는 음식 외에 다른 음식을 전혀 먹을 수 없다고 이렇게 규정이 돼 있죠.
But according to the rules of the political prison camp in North Korea, the political prisoner cannot eat food other than the food that they are allowed to eat.
간수의 생각으로 봤을 때 이 여자애는 분명히 큰 죄를 지었던 겁니다.
So in point of the camp guard, this girl committed a big crime in the camp.
그래서 이제 자기가 자기가 그 여자 죄수를 이제 어린 여자 죄수를 이제 잘 가르쳤는데 왜 그대로 안 따랐냐고 하면서 이제 사정없이 때리기 시작을 했죠.
So the camp guard told her why you didn't obey the rules, and then the camp guard started to beat her.
조금 맞다가 이제 그 여자애는 이제 기절했습니다.
So after get beaten by the camp guard, the girl was fainted.
그래서 저희들이 이제 그 기절한 여자아이를 이제 업고 이제 그 여자의 엄마한테 이제 데려다줬죠.
So we brought the fainted girl to her parents.
근데 이제 다음 날 학교에 안 왔기 때문에 그 여자아이를 데리러 갔습니다.
The next day, the girl didn't come to school, so we went to her house.
근데 이제 그 여자아이의 엄마가 하는 얘기가 그 밤에 맞은 후유증 때문에 이제 열이 나고 이제 아침에 보니까 이제 죽었다고 그렇게 얘기를 했죠.
The girl's mother told us that after got beaten from the camp guard, the girl had a fever and then finally she died.
저희들이 그 여자를 데려갔던 저희들이나 또 그 죽었다고 얘기를 들은 간수나 얼굴 표정이 변하거나 슬퍼하는 거는 단 한 번도 볼 수가 없었습니다.
However, none of us were really sad about her death, or none of us really show any sadful sorrow expression toward her death.
그런데 물론 이런 이 얘기는 내가 그냥 수용소에서 정말 많이 일어나고 있는 우리가 듣기 싫어하는 우리가 듣기 고통스러워하는 얘기들 중에 그냥 한 가지 사실에 불과한 거거든요.
However, this incident is one of many horrible situations that are happening in political prison camp.
북한 정치범 수용소에서 1년에 2번씩 꼭꼭 공개 처형을 하고 있습니다.
Twice a year, a public execution is held in political prison camp in North Korea.
근데 이제 그게 꼭 정말 정치범 죄수들이 정말 죄를 지어서 공개 처형하는지는 잘 모르겠지만 정치범 죄수들한테 항상 무서움을 느끼게 해주고 공포를 주기 위해서 그렇게 공개 처형하는 거거든요.
I don't really know if the political prisoner really did something wrong so that they got public execution, but the reason why the camp guard holds public execution is to give fear to the other political prisoners.
근데 국제사회에서 이제 이런 얘기를 했을 때게 굉장히 충격적이고 굉장히 이제 믿을 수 없는 일이라고 그렇게 놀라워하고 있죠.
When I told this instance to the international communities, they were hardly believe these things happening in political prison camp in North Korea.
내가 수용소에서 24년 동안 살다가 도망쳐 나와서 거기서 정치범 죄수로 살았다고 해도 굉장히 충격적이고 사실 믿지 못할 일이라고 그렇게 많은 사람들이 얘기를 합니다.
When I told many people that I lived in political prison camp for 24 years and escaped from the camp, many people cannot really believe my story and they are very shocked about my story.
근데 제가 그런 얘기를 들을 때마다 오히려 저는 그들한테 그런 질문이 생기거든요.
When many people show me their shockful expression toward me, I always give them raise questions toward other people.
70년 전에 나치 수용소에서 600만 명의 유대인들이 죽을 때에 우리도 지금처럼 똑같은 생각을 했었었죠.
70 years ago, when many people died in Auschwitz, we thought the same thing.
40년 전에 캄보디아 필름필드에서 수백만 명이 학살당할 때도 똑같이 그런 생각을 했습니다. 지금처럼.
When many people died or killed from the massacre in Cambodia in 4 years ago, many people also thought the same thing.
수단 다르푸르에서 수십만 명이 학살될 때에, 루안다에서 수십만 명이 학살당할 때에, 코소보에서 수많은 사람들이 학살당할 때 우리도 지금처럼 똑같은 생각을 계속 하고 있었죠.
When the genocide happened in Darfur, Sudan, Rwanda, or even Kosovo, many people thought the same thing.
우리의 가장 큰 잘못은 우리 눈앞에 그런 공포가 다가오는 걸 느끼지 못하고 살고 있다는 것.
Our biggest mistake is that we didn't really realize the fear that happened in the history.
이게 꼭 북한에서만 일어나는 일이 아니라 바로 여러분들 앞에 체코 땅에도 언젠가 뒤닥칠 수 있는 일이라는 것이죠.
These tragic human rights violations in North Korea is not only happening in North Korea, but it can happen in other countries like the Czech Republic.
후에 세상 사람들이 북한에서 일어난 대학살의 모습을 TV나 영상으로 보고 안타까워하고 재판서를 만들어가지고 그 범죄자를 처벌한다고 했을 때 그때는 아무 의미가 없어지는 거죠.
In the future, when people see this massacre in North Korea and when the perpetrator in North Korea are punished, we cannot really save the dead people in North Korea.
70년 전에 국제형사재판소 만들어갖고 나치 전범자들을 처벌했는데 그게 무슨 의미가 있었는지 저는 되묻고 싶고 죽은 600만 명의 수많은 사람들은 살아 돌아오지도 않았었죠.
70 years ago, the International Criminal Court punished the criminal of war, but it wasn't really meaningful because even though they punished the perpetrator, they cannot really make the dead people survive.
캄보디아에서 학살당했을 때도 그 형사재판소를 만들어갖고 범죄자를 처벌한다고 했었지만은 아무런 의미가 없잖아요.
It was really meaningful to punish the perpetrator of the massacre in Cambodia.
지금 또 유엔이나 국제사회에서 북한의 김정은이를 형사재판해야 된다고 그렇게 많은 얘기들을 나오고 있지만은 사람들이 학살당하고 나서 이런 얘기하는 거는 진짜 아무 의미가 없어요.
It is not meaningful to punish Kim Jong-un or send Kim Jong-un to the International Criminal Court after many people die in North Korea.
질문 시간 있을 때 좀 더 자세하게 설명해 드리겠습니다.
If you have any questions, you can just ask me.
Thank you.
me, I have to use my computer because I have a very bad memory for numbers. I would like to talk a little bit about human rights. I call it at the border. So human rights violations at the borders primarily of Europe, because that is where I live and work. And I'd like to focus on this because for me, possibly, this is not only one area where today we are seeing massive violations of human rights, but also an area where responsibility is often unclear.
Excuse me, can people in the back hear? Is it okay? Can you hear? Good, thank you.
Okay, so it's an area where responsibility is often unclear, accountability is also very difficult to prove, and where traditional human rights mechanisms are often very difficult to use. So I'd like to first of all shed some light on what we see from where we are on the ground. So Malta, as you know, is, as was mentioned earlier, is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, south of Sicily, north of Libya. And it is on what Frontex today calls the Central Mediterranean route. The Central Mediterranean route for irregular entry, irregular border crossing into the European Union. And in terms of irregular border crossing, this route is one of the most significant. So during 2013, there were 40,304 individuals detected crossing this border, as opposed to, for example, 24,000 in the Eastern Mediterranean and 1,316 on the eastern land border. So in terms of irregular border crossing, quite significant. This year, the number of people entering Europe irregularly through this route actually increased. Until May of this year, over almost 50,000 people had arrived in Italy, and by summer the number had practically doubled. So, as you can see, very many people are forced to take this route to enter Europe. As I mentioned earlier, in Malta, the numbers we receive are relatively much smaller, between 1,500 to 2,000 every year, but still, again, for a rock, quite significant. If you look at the countries of origin, you will see that most of the people coming through this route are sub-Saharan Africans, with the largest numbers being Somali, Eritrean, Nigerian, Sudanese, and Ethiopian. Fortress Europe, an organization that documents deaths at the border, at Europe's borders, documented 19,781 lives lost, and this only from monitoring the press, at Europe's borders since 1988. And of these almost 20,000 people, nearly 15,000 lost their lives trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea or the Atlantic Ocean into Europe. IOM have estimated that this year alone, 3,000 people lost their lives trying to cross the Mediterranean. European states generally respond to this phenomenon, the phenomenon of irregular arrivals by boat, or irregular border crossing generally, purely as an irregular migration problem. So the response is increased securitization. We increase border controls, we spend ever more money on ever more sophisticated ways of stopping people from crossing the border, ignoring the fact that these routes, and here I speak especially for this Central Mediterranean route, are not simply irregular migration routes. This route is very clearly an asylum route. If we look at the people who came to Malta and applied for asylum since 2002, over 56% got some kind of protection. That's an acknowledgement that over 56% could not go home without risking very serious violations of their rights, if not loss of life or liberty. In 2012 and 2013, over 80%, just over 80% were granted protection. So that's a very high number. And as the people who arrive in Malta tell us time and time again, the reason we make this journey is not only what is at the end. The reason we make this journey is in our country. It's at the beginning from your country, here I quote. That will drive you to face everything ahead of you, whether it is death or life. To reach Europe, people leaving countries like Somalia have to make a very difficult journey, and one they don't make in a plane or a helicopter or even an air-conditioned coach. It's a journey they make on the back of trucks, at times on foot, traveling on foot for days, and a journey they make by entrusting themselves into the hands of smugglers, who very often violate the rights, violate the basic dignity of the people who they are transporting from one point to the other. The people arriving in Malta talk to us of a life that is characterized by fear of what the smugglers will do to you, constantly under threat. Very often they are irregularly in the countries through which they transit, so they're always afraid of being caught and detained, and in fact many have been detained in abysmal conditions for months in countries like Libya, but not only, and constantly at risk of forced removal. So it's because of this lack of effective protection, because they don't find the protection that they are looking for, that they move on in search of safety. But to reach a place of safety, they have to cross the sea. And as I mentioned earlier, countless lives are lost at sea. But if we just see the numbers, it's difficult to forget that every number is a person. And that almost every person who made that journey has been through a terribly traumatic experience, they talk about huge fear. One man told me, in the sea, people don't only die from drowning, they die of heat, of thirst, and of fear. Because you're in the middle of the sea, in the middle of the deep blue sea, often in very turbulent waters, and there's nothing and no one to help you. Last October, I happened to be present at a time when a number of people who were rescued from a shipwreck were brought to Malta. They were mostly Syrians, many of them very well-educated people, who would probably, in normal circumstances, have managed to get a visa. But because at that point they were refugees, it was absolutely impossible for them to get a visa to enter a place of safety legally. They all came with passports, with regular, authentic, valid passports, but none of them could get a visa. They had been going from embassy to embassy for months trying to enter Europe, but they didn't manage. So then they resorted to the sea. And many of them lost all of their family. One man lost his wife and 3 children. A couple lost their 3 children, all under 5. And from here, they have to start to build a life anew. Yes, they're safe, but at what cost? And I think it should be clear to everyone that people who are fleeing in search of protection, fleeing to save their lives, fleeing massive violations of their rights, fleeing war, shouldn't need to lose their lives to find protection. If this is the system we have created, then there's something very wrong. On arrival in Malta, many people are put in detention, as I mentioned earlier. Until very recently, people spent months in detention. And detention, you are deprived of your liberty, yes, but often in very miserable conditions for a very long time. Some people were in detention for up to 18 months with absolutely nothing to do except worry and think about your future and your family back home. One detainee, he described detention as the dark side of the world, the starvation of the soul. Being deprived of your liberty is always very, very hard. But if this comes after months and years of suffering, of being previously detained in Libya, many of the people who arrive in Malta have been ill-treated, many women have suffered rape, and then they find themselves in detention. It's really very, very difficult to bear. And studies have documented that detention has an extremely detrimental impact on people's physical and psychological well-being, which is not surprising. So, one other thing, besides all of this, besides the suffering it causes, detention also violates human rights, at least the way detention is applied in Malta. And I think it's fair to say, because there are several very significant judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, Malta is not the only country whose law and policy on detention of irregular migrants, whose use of detention to control migration, violates international human rights law. it's not only the law in the case of Malta, but also the conditions, have been found to violate human rights. And for this reason that we're pushing for a change. In conclusion, I think, as I said earlier, this is one of the major human rights challenges that Malta is facing. It's not only Malta's challenge, it's not only Italy's challenge, I would say it's not even only Europe's challenge. Sure, it's Europe's challenge when it comes to receiving people in conditions of dignity. But I think it's a challenge for the world, for all of humanity, because the human rights violations that are causing many people to make this journey to seek protection are happening in their own countries. And these violations also need to be addressed. So it's all of humanity, yes, that needs to address this issue. And yes, what's happening in other countries is our business, is our concern. Besides being a problem for all humanity and a challenge for all humanity, I think it's a challenge to our humanity. Because if we turn away, if we can turn away from this reality of death, hundreds of deaths, hundreds of lives lost and destroyed at our doorstep, then surely we've lost something of our humanity. Thank you very much.
I said I would like to open this for conversation between you, the audience, and our esteemed panelists, but allow me to start with my three questions. One is for both of you, and I have prepared one for each of you. So the general question is, there is a debate going on and on in the world about a certain tension between universality of human rights and specificity of cultures, and that there are some Asian values, for instance, that put certain limitations on the Western understanding of that concept, and so on and so forth. Listening to you, sir, I arrived to my bizarre conclusion that there is a certain level of universality achieved. I think in the methods totalitarian governments, totalitarians are using in the way how to subdue and suppress the population, there are most likely very strange similarities between the experience you had in your labor camps, gulags, killing fields of Cambodians, and all others who tried to do the same thing in the past. So could you then comment on how do you feel when this game is played, difference between our specific cultural values here that want to explain or give some strong reasons for dictators to keep themselves in power, and real universality of human rights. I know that Václav Havel, in his writings and in his speeches, when he spoke about human rights, he was in constant search of some sort of common denominator that should be here, in spite of our cultural differences. Differences need to be respected. But how would you describe this thing in common? Then a question for each of you. I will now go to you, Madam. Obviously, there is certain interface in the area of international mechanisms between regional and universal mechanisms. I think that this border situation is almost materialization of that fact. That you have some universal mechanisms based on, for instance, Charter of the United Nations, then you have whole legal packages protecting this or that type of population. But then you have specific European regional instruments. We most likely live not in the world controlled from the center called Europe anymore. We live in post-European world, but still certain universalism and certain, I would say, inspiration that comes from the case law of the European Court for Human Rights is important. So can you comment yourself on regional versus universal in that respect? And now my specific question for you, sir. I spent time representing the Czech Republic at the United Nations in New York. And Czech Republic is seated not far away from the representatives of Democratic Republic of Korea, because that's the alphabetic order. And I always had strange feelings seeing that gentleman representing your country there or this country there, because as what you have said, clearly demonstrate that this country is in an open violation of basic principles of the charter, of the founding charter of the organization she's part of. When this organization was created, it was obvious that in that moment Germany and Japan, which were in war with allies, could not be part of that organization, that certain condition did need to be satisfied before something like that could have happened. What is your feeling about the, I would say, mind-boggling gap between interstate treatment of the North Korea as a state, which is in such an open violation of basic principles of human rights? So these are my questions. Please, if you can react to that, and then I'll open up the public. Okay, who's ready to go?
Yep.
Emma? To tlumočí ta paní kolegyně. Okay. Can you answer?
Okay. 물론 이제 이 소위 이제 자유민주주의 국가들은 이제 유럽이나 또 이런 아메리카에서 사실 거의 이 북한이 지금까지 이런 짓을 한 것에 대해서 거의 방치했다고 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
First, I think that other democratic countries like Europe or America were neglecting the current human rights situation in North Korea before.
그리고 이제 그 중국이나 러시아가 서희 대국이 큰 나라라고 하는 이제 중국이나 러시아가 그 북한 독재 정권을 이제 강력하게 서포터를 하고 있기 때문에 사실 국제사회가 무슨 어떤 뭐 외교적으로 이 문제를 해결하는 데 있어서는 굉장히 큰 어려움이 있는 거로 이제 제가 뭐 유엔이나 또 이런 유럽연합 이렇게 찾아다니면서 이제 얘기할 때 보면은 그렇게 이제 느끼고 있습니다.
Every time I talk to the United Nations about the situation in North Korea, I felt that China or Russia strongly support the dictatorship in North Korea. So that's one of the hardship that the international community face when they are trying to solve the situation in North Korea.
물론 이제 국제사회가 아주 강력하게 어떠한 액션을 북한 독재자를 압박하는 어떠한 액션을 했을 때에 북한이 이제 이 자기네들이 한 짓에 대해서 이제 잘못했다고 이렇게 시인한 것도 할 때도 있긴 있었죠.
When the international community oppress or took some actions against the North Korean regime, the North Korean regime at some level they agreed with the situation in their country.
이제 그 대표적인 사례가 뭐 1974년이죠. 터키 사건, 판문점 터키 사건. 1974년 정도로 알고 있는데 그때가 이제 한국의 그 DMZ 이 판문점이라고 하는 그런 곳에서 이제 북한 군대가 덕기로 이제 미군 2명을 이제 때려 죽이는 사건이 있었는데 그때에 미국이 이제 강력하게 이제 군사적인 그런 액션을 이제 준비하고 있으니까 북한의 김일성이 바로 이제 그 사과하고 그렇게 조용히 또 끝나게 되는 그런 일이 한 번 있긴 했었죠.
There was one case that the North Korea kind of apologize to the world. During 1970s, in the military zone in Korea, 2 North Korean soldiers killed 2 American soldiers. And so because of that, the American government tried to take a military action against the North Korean regime. So for that, the North Korean regime gave apologize to America.
근데 결과적으로는 근본적인 문제는 이제 국제사회가 자기네들이 골치 아픈 자기네들이 좀 신경 쓸 만한 일들은 전혀 이렇게 하려고 하지를 않기 때문에 북한 문제가 더 어려워지고 있다고 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
However, the basic problem of the world is that the international community kind of have a tendency to avoid very deep struggles or very deep confusions. So that's one of the reasons why the world still cannot solve the problem in North Korea.
그리고 이제 정말 유럽이나 또 이 아메리카나 이제 그런 나라들이 정말 북한이 자기네한테 직접적으로 위협을 가하지 않는 이상에는 뭐 말로만 아니면 뭐 종이장에다 어떠한 글을 써가지고 뭐 유엔에서 이렇게 선을 들고 흔드는 정도지 정말 북한 사람들이 뭐 이렇게 고통당하고 이런 것에 대해서는 사실 우리가 얘기하면 머리만 흔드는 정도고 뭐 어떠한 강력하게 어떠한 이제 액션을 하는 데 있어서는 굉장히 큰 어려움이 있다고 저는 느끼고 있습니다.
If other countries in Europe or the United States face a direct threat from the North Korean regime, then they give some kind of words or statement to the North Korean regime not to do it. But the other countries don't really think about how extreme the North Korean people suffer from the regime. So there is no strong action from the world against the North Korean regime.
북한은 벌써 20년 전에 수백만 명을 이제 굶겨 죽인 그런 거의 뭐 제노사이드 같은 그런 상황을 만들었었는데도 뭐 사실 우리는 그냥 국제사회는 이제 아무것도 하지 않았었기 때문에 이 문제를 어떻게 해결할지에 대해서는 지금 유엔에서 논의를 하고 있고 지금 지켜보고 있는 그런 상황입니다.
20 years ago, so many people died from starvation, and the North Korean regime, it's the North Korean regime who made the people starve to death. However, at that time, the international community did not do anything about this mass starvation in North Korea. And even today, the United Nations or other countries are discussing about this human rights violation in North Korea.
I want to make just a couple of points. I have to admit, I'm not sure I'm primarily a lawyer. I don't spend much time discussing about universality or otherwise of human rights. Maybe it's a mistake. But what we do is discuss human rights with the refugees and migrants arriving in Malta, because one of the things we organize in detention is group sessions. The last one I did was for Somali women. And so we talk about human rights and link, human needs to human rights, what you need to live with dignity. And I am always surprised how what they come up with is so close to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's very rarely anything missing. Sometimes there's something more. I think, yes, human rights are, there could be some differences in understanding. I'm not saying we haven't had discussions around practices like, for example, FGM, but basically, I think human needs are all the same, and people all believe they have the same, in a sense, right to the same, need the same things to be able to live with dignity, and they have a right to be able to do so. When it comes to personal freedom, when it comes to the right to belong to a community, to live in security, to have enough to eat, to be able to access basic medical and social care, everybody believes that, so there's nothing so culturally specific about that after all. The debate about international versus regional versus national, I would also add. For me, at the end of the day, for an individual who is in a situation where his rights are being violated, what makes the difference is whether or not you have access to an effective remedy. As my colleague here mentioned earlier, yes, a judgment after many years is good, but it does not right the wrong. It cannot restore what was lost. For a remedy to be effective, it needs to be effective now. If I am out at sea, or if I have just arrived and I am at risk of being sent back to Libya, what I need is not a judgment that in sending me back to Libya 3 years ago, the government of Malta violated my rights. No, what I need is an action now to stop my removal. That is what will make human rights meaningful for me in that situation. So I think what we advocate for is for remedies that bring a response now. Not to say that reporting on facts and that action taken after is useless. No, it's very important, and it's one way of making a difference. But I think from the individual perspective, effective remedies are extremely important. And as I mentioned earlier, at the border, I think this is one place where often those remedies are least effective. Because if you're in the middle of the deep blue sea, how can you contact a lawyer to petition the court to stop the government from sending you back? How can you fax somebody a representation form to open a case to stop the government? You can't really. If you've arrived in Malta and the government has kept you isolated, not allowed you to speak to anyone, how can anyone lodge a petition to stop your removal to Libya without allowing you to apply for asylum? I must say we have had some success, because last summer when the government of Malta threatened to send back a group of Somalis, because they were too much at that point, to Libya, where they had come from, without allowing them to apply for asylum, the European Court of Human Rights did actually stop the government from doing so, and did that on the strength of an application made by a group of NGOs, JRS included. But that was the first. In the past, we had problems because of legal representation when it came to assisting people out at sea, for example. So, yes, I think these situations are a challenge, among other things, also to the traditional remedies and mechanisms that we have in place to defend the rights of people who are at risk of human rights violations.
Thank you very much. So now it's time to open it up to questions from the audience. I believe that there is a mic out there, so please feel free to open it up. I see already the second hand, but the first one. Okay.
Hi, this is a question for Mr. SHIN. You're quite famous with your book and the documentaries and 60 Minutes interviews. And from what I've read and seen of those, you didn't intend to become a human rights activist, but you have become one. And so I was wondering how in the last 5 years your life has changed, since you have now clearly dedicated your life to try to help those people in North Korea to have a better life, because it seems to be quite different from what we'd seen a couple years ago.
말씀하셨던 것처럼 사실 저에 대한 스토리가 국제사회에 많이 알려졌고, 또 사실 좋은 해피한 스토리는 이제 자랑하고 싶고 알리고 싶지만은 똑같은 여러분들과 똑같은 생각이라고 저는 마음이라고 생각하는데, 숨기고 싶은 가슴 아픈 스토리는 알려지는 걸 원치 않죠. 그래서 저도 이렇게 어쩌다 정말 원치 않게 이렇게 TV나 책에 이렇게 알려줘가지고 사실 굉장히 많이 괴로워하고도 있기도 합니다.
My story was very popular, very well known to the world because of my books or interviews with the media. But as you know, people want to hear a happy story, but sometimes it's hard to talk about the sad story, because my story is also a sad and very horrible story. But I didn't really mean to make my life to be known to the people.
근데 이제 정말 제가 이렇게 수용소의 인권을 위해서, 또 북한 인권을 위해서 이렇게 할 수 있으라고는 저도 단 한 번도 생각해 본 적은 없었거든요.
I never imagined myself work for human rights in North Korea or human rights in political prison camps.
제가 이렇게 유엔이나 유럽연합이나 또 국제사회에 찾아다니면서 이제 이 북한 인권에 대해서 또 정치범 수용소에 대해서 얘기할 때마다 똑같이 느끼는 게 하나 있습니다.
There is one thing that I always felt the same when I talked to the United Nations, European Union, or the international community.
그냥 그 똑같은 게 그냥 머리만 똑같이 이제 흔드는 거예요. 뭐 유럽 사람이나 뭐 유엔 사람이나 뭐 미국 사람이나.
There is a same reaction from from other people. That is, people just agree with what I'm saying.
사실 제가 수용소에서 24년 동안 살 때 제 눈앞에서 봤던 거는 정말 사람들이 매일매일 매 순간 고통스러워하는 모습이었었고 죽어갈 때 그 사람들이 소리 지르는 모습이 정말 고통스러웠었거든요.
What I saw in the political prison camp is many prisoners suffer from the camp guards, and when many people died in the camp, they always scream, and that's all that I saw in the political prison camps.
정말 하루하루가 고통스러우니까 정말 살기 힘든 그런 것이죠. 이 정치범 수용소라는 게.
The political prison camp in North Korea is the place where people live a hard life every day and suffer from the camp guards.
근데 제가 이제 이렇게 이 사회에서 이제 뭐 유행 가고 뭐 이런 국제사회 쳐다니면서 얘기할 때에 사실 저희 얘기를 듣는 사람들은 사실 저희가 수용소에서 이렇게 매일매일 고통스럽게 이렇게 소리 지르는 것만큼 그렇게 급하지 않는 거죠. 그런 걸 느끼고 있습니다.
When I go and talk to the United Nations or other countries, people didn't really experience the same thing I experienced, so they cannot really deeply understand what's actually happening in camp and what people in the camp actually feel.
뭐 학살이라는 거는 뭐 몇 년 동안, 10년 동안, 20년 동안 일어나는 게 아니거든요.
Genocide doesn't happen for more than like 10 years or more than 20 years.
한 달 동안이라도 아니면 하루 동안이라도 대학살은 충분히 일어날 수가 있는 거죠.
The massive killing or genocide can happen in one day or even 1 month.
근데 국제사회는 뭐 몇 년씩, 뭐 1년, 10년, 20년 동안 제가 처음에 말씀드렸던 것처럼 20년 동안 북한 인권에 대해서 알려지기 시작해서 20년이 지났는데도 아직 하나도 바뀐 게 없다고 제가 말씀드렸던 겁니다.
The international community has been discussing about the North Korean human rights more than 20 years, but nothing has changed.
우리가 알아야 될 거는 뭐 눈앞에 보이는 뭐 이런 사람 죽은 모습, 그 증거가 있어야 뭐 처벌할 수 있다가 아니라 눈에 보이지 않지만은 제노사이드 대학살이 일어날 수 있는 그런 것을 이미 전에 예방해야 되는 게 우리가 해야 될 일이라고 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
What we have to know is that when we see the dead people in front of our eyes, then it is late. We have to prevent that the same thing should not happen again.
나치의 유대인 홀로코스트 수용소가 만들어져서 5년이지만 진짜 그 600만 명이 학살당하는 거는 1년이라는 기간 동안에 학살당한 거거든요.
The Holocaust in Nazi was built for 5 years, was operated for 5 years, but in 1 year, so many people died in a concentration camp.
뭐 캄보디아 킬링필드는 뭐 200만 명이 죽을 때에 뭐 5년, 6년도 안 걸렸었죠.
When so many people died in Cambodia, it takes only less than 5 or 6 years.
독재자들은 사람들을 학살하는 그런 시스템을 개발하고 사람들을 학살하는 그런 매뉴얼을 만들어서 계속 발전시키고 있는데 국제사회는 그걸 대응하지 못하고 계속 시간만 낭비하고 있다는 게 더 안타까운 겁니다.
Many dictators in the world developed the system of massacre or genocide, but the international community could not develop any prevention of these kind of system of genocide.
일주일 전에도 제가 뉴욕에서 유엔에서 많은 사람들 만나서 이제 얘기도 했었지만은 사실 얘기할 때뿐이지 북한 수용소의 사람들의 고통을 들여다본다고 하게 되면 사실 전혀 이 희망이 없는 것처럼 보입니다.
A week ago, I also talked to the United Nations about the human rights situation in North Korea, but only that time people listened, but they cannot really feel or actually understand the suffer that the North Korean people are still facing in the political prison camp.
제가 그러지 않았습니까? 제가 살았던 정치범 수용소에서 2만 명, 3만 명이 학살당하는 건 하룻밤이면 되거든요. 근데 국제사회에서는 이 문제를 1년, 2년, 몇 년씩 가지고 의논을 하기 때문에 전혀 아무런 효과가 없는 겁니다.
At the Camp 14 where I used to live, 20,000 or even 30,000 people died in one day, but the international community is just discussing about the same issues more than 1 year or even 2 years.
Thank you very much. There were questions over there. Whoever. Sir.
Dobrý den. Děkuji, Jan Šinága. Jedna krátká poznámka a dvě krátké otázky. Mohu potvrdit to, co říká pan HYUK o víceméně odmítavém zájmu veřejnosti, protože lidi dneska mají už toho zla prostě plnou mysl a instinktně to odmítají. Jako důkaz můžu uvést výstavu zločinných Ruska v Čečensku, kterou jsem dokázal zajistit se ruského parlamentu, nebyla v tom zahájení zakázána. Tady to bylo 7 výstav, pouze v knihovně Václava Havla v Karlových Varech, tak se zúčastnila bohatě veřejnost, ale média referovala jenom místně. Otázky. Pane HYUKu, mohl jste nám říci, jaký je současný době zdravotní stav diktátora Severní Koreje a jak hodnotíte s jeho současným zdravotním stavem, případným úmrtím, další možnosti vývoje Severní Koreje z tak horšímu nebo k lepšímu. Jinak trošku mě zaskočila ta první diskuze, jsem nebyl v programu, že byl diskuze, tak zpětně otázka možná i pro vás. Jak vy se díváte z vašeho pohledu na to, jak země Václava Havla dnes naplňuje jeho myšlenky a odkaz ve věci lidských práv? Máte jiné zkušenosti, nemůžete mít ty, co máme my, ale věřte, že ty v České republice máme na toto poli hodně co dělat. Vědnice jsou plná nevinných lidí. Děkuji vám. A vám speciálně, paní HYUKovi, za vaši statečnost. Máte mou obdiv. Smekám.
I'm afraid that now I will be interpreting it because interpreters cannot. Can we come because we don't have here earphones? So here, how can we proceed? Okay, I can translate myself these 2 questions. The first question was concerning the health situation of the dictator. How, the current ruler of North Korea, how he's doing, what is his health situation, and what would be your expectation that can happen in the case he steps down or dies? What would be the future of North Korea? That's the first question. And the second question concerns your perception of Václav Havel's legacy. Václav Havel's legacy in the area of human rights. Obviously, that's topic. Václav Havel has passed away almost 3 years ago, so now it's a legacy living after he left us. So how do you see Václav Havel's legacy and its importance in the world? Is it, and then gentleman was very respectful to you. He highly recognizes your achievements and bows deeply in front of you. Is it a fair translation? I hope so.
저도 뉴스를 통해서 김정은이가 거의 한 달 가까이 이제 모습을 안 보이는 것에 대해서 이제 국제사회가 관심을 가지고 뉴스로 나오고 있는 것도 저도 이제 뉴스를 보고 알고 있습니다.
I heard about the Kim Jong-un's health situation or his disappearance from the media.
네, 사실 뭐 병이 없어서 없는데도 안 보였을 수도 있고 정말 병이 있어서 치료 받느라고 안 보였을 수도 있는 거겠죠.
I think that Kim Jong-un disappeared because he has some illness, or just even though he doesn't have illness, he can be disappeared.
근데 제 생각으로는 북한의 김정은이 몸 상태라면은 사실 병이 안 걸리는 게 더 이상하다고 저는 보아지고 있습니다.
For my opinion, I think it is more weird that Kim Jong-un is not ill because of his body condition.
근데 글쎄요, 저도 왜 안 보이는지 저도 궁금해가지고 뉴스를 찾아보고 있는 중이라서 자세히는 거기에 대해서는 잘 모르겠습니다.
I also curious about where Kim Jong-un is, so I'm still keep watching the news media.
북한의 미래는 사실 나는 정치범승소의 미래만 생각을 해봐가지고 북한의 미래에 대해서는 아직 별로 많이 생각해 본 적은 없습니다.
I always thought about the future of political prison camp in North Korea, and I haven't really think about the future of North Korea.
중요한 거는 세계에서 유일하게 이제 한민족이 둘로 갈라져가지고 서로가 이제 고통받으면서 살고 있기 때문에 하나로 합쳐줘야 되는데 그게 좀 굉장히 국제사회에서도 별로 이렇게 하나로 합쳐지는 게 좋아하는지 싫어하는지 잘 몰라가지고 이것도 국제사회가 이제 많은 관심을 가져야 된다고 생각을 합니다.
But the most important thing is that it is very sad that one country has been separated for many years, and I'm still wonder if the international community wants to Korea to be united. But I think that international community's concern on the situation in Korean Peninsula is very important.
북한의 미래는 정말 저도 어떻게 생각을 해봐야 되는지 모르겠네요. 저도 깊이 한번 생각을 해보도록 해야겠습니다.
I think I have to also very deeply think about the future of North Korea.
근데 이제 북한에 정말 다른 나라 독재의 나라들에서 좀 찾아볼 수 없을 정도로 이제 할아버지, 아버지, 손자까지 이렇게 쭉 독재로 이제 내려오고 있는 나라는 정말 북한밖에 없죠.
It is very, North Korea is the only country where 3 generations took a power compared to other dictator countries.
근데 정말 안타까운 거는 이 북한 사람들, 북한 국민들이 단 한 번도 민주주의나 자유에 대해서 겪어보지 못했다는 거거든요.
But the most sad thing is that the people in North Korea have never experienced the freedom or democracy.
100년 전에 일본이 들어와서 식민지 만들었고 그게 끝나니까 김일성이가 바로 들어와서 이제 독재를 시작으로 해가지고 단 한 번도 이 자유나 민주주의라는 그런 체제나 그런 교육이나 그런 것 자체를 받아본 적이 없는 사람들이 바로 이 북한 사람들입니다.
100 years ago, there was the Japan colonized the Korean Peninsula, but right after the independence from Japan, Kim Il-sung took power in North Korea, so people in North Korea have never really experienced this democracy or freedom.
그때 이제 김일성이가 와서 바로 북한 사람들한테 정말로 북한 사람들을 한테 거짓말하고 이렇게 북한 사람들을 바보로 만드는데 굉장히 쉬웠던 거죠.
So for Kim Il-sung, it was very easy to make people in North Korea stupid, or he could also lie to people.
그리고는 그때 만들어진 게 지금 거의 70년 가까이 지금 이 독재 체제가 유지되고 있는 거죠.
And because of the system that Kim Il-sung built 70 years ago, the same system is almost continue in North Korea.
제가 도망치고 나서 거의 한 8년 동안 국제사회를 보면서 뭐 이런 중동이나 또 이런 동유럽이나 이런 많은 나라들에서 이제 혁명이 일어나는 거 뭐 이런 사람들이 이제 투쟁하는 걸 보면서 북한도 그렇게 하길 바라는 마음이지만은 제가 처음에 말씀드렸던 여러 가지 이런 이유들 때문에 그런 거에 이제 일어날 수 있는 그런 게 이제 굉장히 좀 힘든 그런 상황이라고 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
For 8 years since I escaped from North Korea, I saw many revolutions in Middle Eastern countries. So I hoped that one day North Korea see the revolution or some change. But still, these reasons that I mentioned before, it is very hard for North Korean people to make a revolution.
근데 이제 북한의 독재 체제가 정치범 수용소가 없으면은 존재할 가치가 없거든요. 정치범 수용소가 있기 때문에 북한 독재적 시스템이 존재하고 있는 거죠.
The North Korean dictator maintained its system by operating the political prison camps.
이 정치범 수용소가 만들어졌기 때문에 북한 김일성이가 자기를 싫어하고 반대되는 사람들 다 죽이고 그 가족들을 수용소에다 잡아놓고 북한 사람들을 이제 공포하고 이제 무섭게 이렇게 만들어놨기 때문에 지금까지 북한 독재 시스템이 유지되어 올 수 있지 않았나 생각하고 있습니다.
I think the North Korean system is still remained the same because Kim Il-sung established the political prison camp many years ago, and he killed many people who were opposed against him.
네, 결과적으로는 북한의 독재 시스템이 뭐 없어져야 할 텐데 그게 언제 있을지는 저도 사실 잘 모르는 상황이기 때문에 굉장히 힘들죠.
So I think that the North Korea's dictator system should be disappeared soon, but I don't know when it can become as real.
I have a question for Ms. Camilleri. Did I pronounce that right? Yeah. My question is, what, in your opinion, can the EU states do to ameliorate the conditions of refugees in the detention centers? Should there just be a complete change of paradigm? Because just also when you were speaking, the word detention center is very loaded. It already sounds like these people have to be punished for committing a crime just because they're asking for permission to live in your country after they've been through horrors of escaping through basically half of Africa. And the other question is, what are your views on possibilities of ameliorating these conditions, especially in light of the increasing prevalence of institutionalized xenophobia and racism in European governments and countries?
Very big questions. I'm not sure I can answer satisfactorily in 5 minutes, but I think, as I mentioned when I was talking earlier, it's clear that the detention, speaking specifically about Malta, it's clear that the detention law, policy, practice, as implemented today, has to change. Has to change because it violates, there are particular elements of it, considerably significant ones, which violate Article 5 of the European Convention of Human Rights. The court has also clearly said that the conditions in one centre, which is the better one, also violate Article 3 of the Convention because of factors which largely affect all of the population there. So yes, there's a clear need to change even because of that. Beyond that, it's clear that many of the people coming through this route are asylum seekers. All of them, practically with very few exceptions, apply for asylum. So that they are treated first and foremost as irregular migrants as opposed to asylum seekers is, for me, fundamentally incorrect. And in fact, what we advocate, we being JRS, but also with the other NGOs who work in the field, is that yes, if you have people arriving irregularly, it's fair enough that you need to register them to know who they are, etc. But beyond that, there's absolutely no need to deprive people of their liberty while they're waiting for the outcome of their asylum application. The law allows detention to be used in certain very specific limited circumstances, and even then, always in line with the law and with basic human rights standards. So you may use it only when it's permitted. Given the population we're dealing with, it's even more necessary that action is taken to create alternative means of receiving people in dignified conditions. And I think this is going to be, for Malta, the biggest challenge now. Because the temptation is to say, well, okay, we won't detain, we'll just put people in open centres. But the reality is that people, even in open centres, the conditions are very poor and people have hardly any support. So, yes, there needs to be a completely new, a shift in paradigm, but also a completely new structure that does allow for reception in conditions of dignity. I think there are many, I speak from my experience within the JRS network in Europe, but also from what I read and hear from other colleagues working with NGOs in other European countries, the challenge of receiving asylum seekers, large numbers of asylum seekers arriving by boat, is a challenge that is shared, faced not only by Malta, but also countries like Italy, Cyprus, Greece, etc. And these are, and in many of these countries, let's say, that it presents a challenge, but there are efforts that need to be made to improve. Regarding the impact of the rise of right-wing and xenophobic sentiments on the willingness to improve conditions, I think that's definitely a factor. It always has been and will continue to be. I fear that with the increasing, in a sense, even as a result of things that are happening outside of Europe, for example, in Iraq and in Syria now, it will actually serve to fuel the fear and the prejudice and the, in a sense, not only towards people arriving, but particularly towards Muslims, for example, in Europe. And I do fear that, yes, this could also in some way prompt states to justify measures which, by other standards, would not be acceptable. That said, the law is there, and it's my hope that it will be, the court has spoken to, it's my hope it will be upheld.
Thank you. We are almost running out of time, but a gentleman over there had a question. Please, last one.
Mohu.
Yes.
Mohu.
Yes, ano.
Dobře, Prescott. Omlouvám svou bídnou angličtinu, tudíž raději přesně, abych přesně formuloval, tak budu mluvit česky otázku. Otázka číslo 1 směřuje k panu Youngovi.
Prosím, jenom jednu otázku, protože máme málo času. Jo. Jenom jednu otázku, jestli můžu.
Ano, otázka je tato. Domnívám se, že se musí formulovat věc jasně. Změna tam, kde se trpí nedostatkem lidských práv, je změna v této zemi. Tam k tomu jsou dvě možné cesty. Jedna z nich je, že teda najde odezvu v té zemi prostě deklarace lidských práv a, jako by řekl, veřejná světová, teda světový nátlak v tomto. Druhá cesta je cesta silová. Pokus o silovou cestu ukázal v řadě případů, například v Libyi, že může končit daleko hůře z hlediska teda situace lidí v té zemi. I když ten režim prostě u Kaddáfího byl jaksi diktátorský a tak dále. To je otázka číslo 1. Za jakých okolností můžeme tedy očekávat, že by našla teda deklarace lidských práv odezvu přímo v zemi, teda v Severní Koreji? Je to obecnější otázka, de facto po celé plénu. Druhá otázka je otázka uprchlíků, který se stavěl teda na paní z Malty. Ta otázka je, prosím vás, konkrétně pro Evropskou unii. Ten rozpor je, že prostě země Evropské unie se obávají přílivu uprchlíků a nevědí, jakým způsobem ji řešit. A tedy otázka, jak to vidí tedy pan?
I hoped for one question. I got one for each of you. But please, because we have run out of time, be very brief and give us one word or one sentence long answer. Thank you very much. So, who wants to start?
뭐 몇십 년 전에 무슨 세계 인권 선언문이 만들어져가지고 이제 뭐 북한 인권 얘기할 때도 이제 이런 인권 선언문 가지고 이제 얘기를 하는데 사실 독재자가 없어지고 이런 인권 독재자에 의해서 자행되고 있는 끔찍한 인권 만행들이 없어지기 전까지는 사실 이 세계 인권 선언문이 사실 아무런 의미가 없다고 저는 생각을 합니다. 그냥 종이장에다 펜으로 쓴 그냥 글 정도로밖에 하는 의미가 없는 거죠.
I know that many years ago, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was established. And when people talk about human rights situation in North Korea, they also talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But I think this Universal Declaration is not meaningful unless the dictator in North Korea would be disappeared. It's just a letter.
정말 악한 사람들, 독재자들은 아주 강력한 액션을 하면서 사람들을 고통스럽게 하는데 소위 자기 스스로 선하다고 이제 표현하는 사람들은 사실 액션을 하질 않습니다. 그냥 보기만 하고 생각만 하지 액션하는 거는 굉장히 이제 시간이 오래 걸리는 그런 큰 문제가 있는 거죠.
The bad person, like the dictator, can take a very strong action against the people. However, the very kind people do not really take an action, but they just think.
이 세계 인권 선언이 정말 쓸모없는 정의장이라 아니라는 걸 보여주기 위해서는 국제사회 유엔이 어떠한 정말 강력한 독재자들이 무서워하고 나쁜 악한 사람들이 무서워할 수 있는 강력한 액션이 필요하다는 게 제 생각입니다.
To show that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is useful, the United Nations first have to show a strong action against the North Korean regime so that they can actually help the people in North Korea.
Thank you.
Okay, very briefly, well, it's clear that the arrival of large numbers of refugees, asylum seekers, does present a challenge. The concern, possibly the fear, is understandable, even if not always justifiable. That said, I think action does have to be taken. States do need to take action to put the laws that they themselves have voluntarily signed up to or actually enacted themselves into practice. Asylum seekers should not, as I said earlier, should not need to lose their lives to obtain protection. There has to be some way of obtaining asylum safely. States should respect the laws that they are subject to. And I think I want to close with a paraphrasing of the lovely quote of Václav Havel, which is linked to this panel. I won't read. Sure, all the concerns of sovereignty, borders, etc., very important, but securitization can't be the answer. That's my bit. As he says here, and I paraphrase, people are more important. And in all of the actions we take, we should put first the protection of people's rights. Thank you.
Okay. I would like heartily thanks to our panelists, thanks to you for your active participation. And before I'm going to invite you for a cup of coffee, which is going to be served in the back of this room. I'm sorry. Once more, before I invite you for a cup of coffee, which is going to be served in the back of this space, announcement. Václav Library would like to give to all of you small gift, which is a book or booklet that has just come out. It's our contribution to this debate here. I'm one of the authors here, so I know what is in it, and basically it is our, I would say, written contribution to this ongoing debate here. So please feel free, pick up a copy and coffee, and if you have a time, read it and enjoy it. Thank you very much.